Hi, I'm Beck. I love books, and here are 20 recommendations for LGBT plus History Month for every type of reader. Before I get into the recommendations, I think it goes without saying that you should read queer all year. These books are recommended to take you throughout the rest of the year, throughout your queer reading lives. It isn't a monthly tokenistic thing for me. These books that I have read in other months, in other years, and I would just love to share them with you. I have tried to make these as succinct as possible because I have 20 recommendations I would like to get through. So I've got a little script, so if you see me not looking at the camera, I'm looking at the notes that I've taken about these books. Also, I don't have every single book physically because a lot of these are non-fiction, and I read a lot of my non-fiction on audiobook. And audiobooks are reading, as we discussed in the last video. So, what is LGBT plus History Month? It was established by Schools Out, which is an educational charity in the UK. The charity has been running for a long time, since about 1974, I think, and the first LGBT History Month was in 2005. On their website, which I'll link down below, there are loads of resources that you can use in the classroom, yourself, to educate other people about LGBT history. And every year they choose a different theme, and the theme for this year was activism and social change. So a lot of the recommendations that I have for you fit around that theme. They also choose 5 LGBT plus figures that match the theme or that have demonstrated the theme in some manner. And the figures this year include people like Octavia Hill and Annie Kenney. So if you'd like to find out more about them, there are videos on the website that, as I said, I've linked down below. So let's get into the recommendations. I have kind of tried to subcategorize these recommendations so that you can pick the sorts of books that you think you'll definitely like. The first subcategory I've got is memoirs. And the first recommendation I have for you is We Have Always Been Here by Samira Habib. Now, I've tried to keep the summary to 1 sentence per book. So, this is a queer Muslim memoir about internalized queer repression and religious segregation. It's followed by a move into a seemingly more liberal country, move to Canada, where personal acceptance and growth occurs. You should read this book because it is equal parts devastating, disappointing, and uplifting somehow, and it packs a punch despite its short length. I think it's only about 220 pages. The second memoir that I think you should definitely read is All the Young Men by Ruth Coker Burks. Now, I have spoken about this on a video before, but I am bringing it back out for this list because I feel like it's just so important. It tells the story of a young single mother who finds herself at the front of the AIDS activism in the 1980s to 90s after she visits a friend in hospital, and she's the only person that's willing to help a patient who's dying whose door has been closed off and is painted red. You should read this book because it is horrifying. It truly is horrifying. It teaches you about both the true horrors of human nature and the care and love of it too. My third recommendation is a book called A Letter to My Transgender Daughter, or A Girlhood. And it's a memoir written in the form of a letter from the writer to her daughter, who has made it clear to the family in childhood that they weren't a boy, but actually they were a girl. It recalls how the family had to move from a Republican state due to fear and prejudice. The reason that you should read this book is because it's just so eye-opening, because the mother grows increasingly aware of the privilege that she has because she works in academia, she has money, and even though she has this privilege, her daughter still is seen as not being a person. And it's very eye-opening because not only do we realise the mistreatment of the daughter is really significant, but also we realise how much worse it could be if she wasn't white, if she didn't have money. And for that, and for the writer's acceptance of her privilege, it is really, really good, I think, that you should read it. The fourth memoir that I think is worth reading at any point, not just in LGBT History Month, is Fire Island by Jack Parlett. I didn't know what Fire Island was. I don't know if that's a common thing, if it's maybe because I'm not American. It's a barrier island off the coast of New York, and it's been a haven for queer people for years. And this memoir tells the story of the writer going to sort of find himself on Fire Island and reflecting on its journey from a place people used to escape themselves through the AIDS epidemic to modern day, essentially. I didn't even know this place existed. And so I think you should read it because to be in a specific place where you can track a timeline through your history is fascinating. It's time to move on to the next category, which is informative, generally informative works. And the first recommendation I have for you is Black on Both Sides by C. Riley Snorton. This is stories of trans narratives from the 1800s until now, and they've been obscured from society. There's a lot of sort of themes in these books of stories that have been deleted or forgotten, erased. These are stories that have been erased from trans history, and it kind of shines a light on the ways that blackness and transness have been interconnected and inseparable throughout the years. I recommend this because it's genuinely really interesting, and it poses the questions about why this omission has occurred, and it just makes you think about exactly how much omission has occurred in terms of this history. It's really interesting. Another really interesting book that I think you should pick up under on informative is A Short History of Trans Misogyny. This book is particularly good. It attempts to answer some questions that really shouldn't exist, like why are trans women the most discriminated against group? And why is there a sudden resurgence of social discourse around transness? I think you should read this because it is quite easy to read, but it is so important in the current political climate to unpick some of the prejudices that the trans community faces. It was accessible, but also thought-provoking. We go on to the wee category I've got that's called anthologies now. The first anthology that I recommend that you read is called The Love That Dares. Now, I do have a physical copy of this one. I know. One audiobook I haven't done. Got my little book here. You can see it is very well read, very tabbed. I've got bookmarks, I've got sticky notes in it. This is a collection of letters between queer lovers that have survived through time. There's public figures such as Benjamin Britten and Audre Lorde in there, and also lesser known people. I think that you should read this because it is really easy to read. You can dip in and out of it, and it's a nice reminder sometimes of how far we have come as a community in terms of our sense of self. So that is The Love That Dares. Pop that on the table. The next book that I think that you should definitely read, this is recommendation number 8, I think, is Trans History in 99 Objects. This is almost like a coffee table book, but it's not quite that size, it's not quite that finish, and it's exactly as it says. It would be a great gift, or, as I said, a coffee table book. It focuses on erasure, items that have been curated by artists or scholars or writers. There's huge variety, and it's a double page spread, and there's a trans item or a trans thing from history, essentially. I haven't read all of it yet. Everything I have read from it, I've been really glad that I learned, and I don't think there's ever been a page that I've looked at in that book where I haven't learned something. So I highly recommend that one. Another anthology that I recommend that you pick up is the poetry anthology called 100 Queer Poems. This one. It spreads over so many years. It's from the 20th century right up to the present day, and it's a beautiful selection. If you like poetry, I really do recommend this one. It's got a sticker on it though. How do you feel about stickers on books? Please, can we just ban them? I enjoyed dipping in and out of this one. I didn't necessarily read it as a collection, but it's another really good one to dip in and out of. I think that's what's so good about anthologies. I have one more anthology to show you, and that is this one. I recommend this one. This is number 10. It is Queer Life, Queer Love. It's 42 different voices from around the world, and these are all sort of writers that entered a competition. So there's a competition to be in this book. This book is now, book 3 is in production at the moment, and you can actually enter the competition to be in book 3. So if you're a writer, I recommend that. It's the competition is in memory of one of the publisher's daughters who died quite young, I think age 20. And It's the different genres and the different experiences in this that makes it special to me. Every voice really is saying something different. You could read it all in one go, or you could dip in and out of it. And there are so many voices in here that would previously and historically have been silenced. And I think that's really important to celebrate. Recommendation number 11 is for a graphic novel called Queer, A Graphic History. And you might think it's just a boring history book that they've put pictures with, but it's absolutely not that at all. It's really, really interesting. It's not what I expected. I borrowed it from the library, actually, and I had to extend my loan because I was enjoying it so much. It's sort of like a queer look at the heteronormative world and big things that happened in culture and society, and the resilience and uprising of queer voices. And there are so many things in this book that I hadn't even really considered before reading it. That's why I think that you should read it. And also, it's a graphic novel, so it is accessible for all sorts of readers, which is great. It does have some mature themes in it, so I wouldn't recommend it for children and young adults, but I do have some recommendations for that later. Okay, it's time for the fiction. Now, I know fiction doesn't necessarily directly tell you about history in LGBT History Month, but the fiction recommendations I've chosen are all books that I think show important historical things in their own way. So the first book that I have to recommend you is Shuggie Bain. I do have a copy of this, but I've forgotten to take it off my shelf. So we'll just put the picture up. If you haven't read Shuggie Bain, it is heartbreaking. It's a tale of poverty, family difficulties, including addiction, and the exploration of sexuality, set in Glasgow in sort of 1980s Thatcher-esque, well, Scotland and Britain. The treatment of young Shuggie as he sort of explores his identity sort of hammers down the barrier that poverty can really place and closed-minded society can place on a young life. It's beautiful, it's raw, but for me it was really, really real. I think that you should read this because I found it really relatable, and if nothing else, maybe you will learn more about me through reading it, because I feel like I had lots of experiences that are similar to that. Positive, but never mind. My 13th recommendation, which is unlucky for none of you, because this is a fantastic book, was Swimming in the Dark. This is another one that really, really surprised me. I heard it was really good. I picked it up. I thought about reading it for a while, and eventually I read it last year. And it's a sort of first chance encounter love story of two young men in 1980s Poland, and they spend like a sweet romantic time together exploring poetic works and art, and then they end up meeting each other again, but on opposite sides of the communist divide in 1980s Poland. It adds a bittersweet personal twist to a really important period of history that has devastated and repressed so many people, and so I think it's an important book for LGBT History Month. Book number 14 is this one that I bought in the Gay Pride bookshop in Manchester. It's Dream of Ding Village. And this really took me by surprise. When this came out, it was banned in China, and it's set in a poor village in China, and it's based on 3 years undercover research by the writer, who based themselves in a village that had been devastated by a blood-selling scandal. And this story sort of tells the story behind a blood-selling ring and explores AIDS, queerness, and otherness in general. Because it shines a light on, in my opinion, how far humanity will go, how humanity will do anything for its own gain. I feel like it's just moments in history and lessons that we can't allow to be censored. And so I think that this is an important book as well for LGBT History Month. Number 15 is a book that I also have already spoken to many, many people about, and that is The Death of Vivek Oji. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It is, if you don't know, the story of the life and death of a character and the damage that societal expectations and repressing your true self and secrets can have on a vulnerable young person. It is one of the best books I have ever read, and I think that is all I need to say about that one. Please read it if you haven't already. Number 16 is Slant by Catherine O'Donnell. Now, this was one of the suggested reads for the Read Queer All Year book club that I run on Instagram and in Discord, if you're interested in that. obviously links in the description box down below. We didn't actually end up picking this book to read, but I bought it and read it anyway because I was really interested in it. It's a sort of split timeline lesbian love story, and it's set mostly in 1980s Ireland, following the life of an activist who's anti-marriage but campaigning for equal marriage. She's campaigning in the 2000s, but she flashes back to the 80s where she's campaigning for other things. It's like being an activist is rekindling her memories of being an activist before. There's so much growth in this book and so much dark humour in a traditional Irish and Scottish novel sort of way. And I really recommend this if you enjoy that vibe, Irish writing in particular. Very, very good. Recommendations 17 to 20 are children and young adults books. I do read a lot of young adult fiction. If you don't, I totally understand. My first recommendation is a book called Only This Beautiful Moment. And in this book, this is another one that I've got, but I've not picked up. 3 generations of the same Iranian family are living in times of political unrest or in modern times, but struggling with their sexual identity. And it explores the sort of strengths and weaknesses of family bonds and generational trauma and repression. The triple narrative form of it really highlights inherited prejudice. And I think you should read it because it kind of emphasises that learning who you are can be a lifelong endeavour. I was in tears reading this book. It was absolutely beautiful. Book number 18 is The Fights That Make Us. And the main character in this uncovers their cousin's diary from 30 years ago. And they're doing a school project about lost voices. And through exploring this cousin's diary, they learn the activism and fighting for fundamental human rights that their cousin had to do back then. And it's almost like a contrast to the fighting for their rights that they're having to do in the modern day. And it's a really accessible contemporary view on how times have or haven't changed. It's positive, but also there are really important messages in it. And I think this one is definitely one to read. Recommendation number 19 is a book called Wayne by Rachel Plummer. This is a beautiful little book. It's reimaginings and retellings of fairy tales and myths and legends, mostly Scottish, but through a queer lens. And it has a wide variety of topics and respinnings in it. And I really thought this was unique and beautiful. There are different levels of stories and poems in it for different levels of reader as well. So if you were to get this and you had children or there was a family that you wanted to gift it to, everybody would be able to get something from it. I really, really enjoyed that. And number 20, the last recommendation that I have, is Proud by Juno Dawson. And this is another anthology, but make it young adult. It's stories, confessions, and statements for teens from a huge variety of well-known young adult authors, such as Dee Rata. And there is something, in my opinion, just so raw and unpretentious about writing for a young adult audience that sometimes makes young adult anthologies just more powerful, more impactful somehow. It gets the message across harder, I guess. I'm not sure how else to describe it. This is a really good one to pick up and I highly recommend it. As a finish to this video, I've been recommended 5 books by other people. So I'm going to share what these books are that I'm going to read with you, and maybe you'll want to read them too. Have some information about them over here. So if you see me looking over there, I'm just reading my information. So the first book that I've been recommended that I haven't read, unbelievably, is The Stonewall Reader. So it says, for the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, it's an anthology chronicling the tumultuous fight for LGBTQ rights in the 1960s and the activists who spearheaded it. I know that this is an absolutely must-read book, and I just haven't got my hands on a copy of it yet, but I will read it. A book that I've seen recommended from my favourite queer bookshop, which is Category Is Books, is Outrageous. And Outrageous sort of tells the story of Section 28. Section 28 passed into law in 1988, forbidding local authorities from teaching the acceptability of homosexuality as a family relationship. Basically, you weren't allowed to teach anybody in schools that being gay was okay. So this book is a researched and passionate account of the details behind the unthinkable prejudice and power of community to overcome it. So that's really, really interesting because I actually don't know that much about Section 28 in terms of this level of detail. And it sounds like somebody's done a lot of research and produced this book to do with it. And because of that, I'm excited to read it. The third book that I have been recommended is How to Survive a Plague. I've seen that recommended by Queer Lit. And that is the definitive history of the successful battle to halt the AIDS epidemic. And it's from the creator of the documentary How to Survive a Plague. Now, this is a really, really long book. So I will probably have to audiobook this because non-fiction long books, I'm not sure. I just have a morbid fascination, a horrible, haunting fascination with reading books to do with the AIDS epidemic, because it was just, I just cannot believe how atrociously people were treated. So I will definitely read this one. I'm not sure when, because, you know, she's a chunky one. I've had a couple of recommendations from some friends on Blue Sky. So my first recommendation from somebody on Blue Sky is Last Night at the Telegraph Club. This is a story of love and duty set in San Francisco's Chinatown during the Red Scare of America during the 1950s. Lily, the main character, is Chinese American and her father has earned citizenship, but her deportation is always a threat, so she has to hide her true self. This sounds absolutely amazing, right up my street. Can't believe I've not read it yet, but I do think I have it. So that'll be moving straight up to the top of my TBR. The last book that I've been recommended by friends is Last Call. It's a true story of love, lust and murder in queer New York. And this is a true crime book. And it's basically a true crime account of the elusive serial killer who preyed upon gay men in the 1990s. And essentially, because of the sexuality of his victims and because of the AIDS epidemic, the murders were almost entirely just brushed under the carpet and forgotten, even though he's one of the most prolific serial killers. And although this might not be particularly activism is cancelling out oppression and cancelling out erasure. And if this is a horrendous story that has been erased because of sexuality, absolutely think it's a great recommendation. It might suit some people who are into crime as well, and I'll definitely be picking this one up. Thank you to everybody who's given me recommendations for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in learning more about LGBT History Month, or if you are interested in exploring more books, can I please remind you to look on the LGBT History Month website, which is linked down below. There is also the Digital Trans Archive, which I'll link down below, which is an archive of pieces of literature and writing that have been collected. And we also have lots of local queer bookshops. Please support your local queer bookshops. My favourite local bookshops are Typewriter Books in Edinburgh, Lighthouse also in Edinburgh, which is a radical bookstore, and Categories in Glasgow. Let me know what recommendations you have for me to read next, and let me know if you've read any of the books that I've recommended. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!